From the other side, from Eden Green side, I think what really stood out to me was the mission of Eden Green. The two founders, the inventors of the technology, had brought it over from South Africa and had really uh, struggled and worked hard to get it to a point of commercialization. And so I saw what the heart behind why they built this tech, which was to feed people. And it wasn't, initially it was in South Africa where they invented it literally out of their garage, and it was born out of just a story of seeing a shortage of food in their own community, seeing a 5-year-old boy stuff his pockets with food to take back to his 3-year-old sister because it wasn't his day to eat. Mm-hmm. And then seeing just like, man, there's got to be we have the tools, we have our brains and just our inventive creator type mentality. We have to be able to solve for that.
Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking all about vertical farming. And to talk about this episode with me, I have the CEO of Eden Green Technology, Eddy Badrina. So Eddy, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks for having me. My name's Eddy Badrina. I'm the CEO of Eden Green Technology. It's a vertical farming platform that's just devoted to changing the way that we farm food and feed people at scale.
Awesome. So just right off the bat, what got you into this vertical farming idea? Do you come from an agricultural background? Was this kind of a new interest that you just kind of got into? What's your history with this?
So it's a pretty funny story. I have a degree in psychology from Texas A&M. So the closest thing I had prior to this in terms of ag was my Aggie ring from here in Texas. But really what got me interested was, something that was very personal to me, which was I had started another company in 2010, was very fortunate to have built it up, bootstrapped it as a startup all the way to acquisition in 2016. And then had an opportunity to buy it back about 11 months later. And after I had bought it back and we were running it, my business partner and I were running it again, really had a chance to take a step back and think, okay, what do I want to do with the second half of my career? Had a career in government, foreign policy, and then at the White House, and then started this company. But really, I had the rest of my life to look forward to. And I said, what do I want to be doing? And three things really came to mind. I'll call them like a 3-point hypothesis. One is, for me, what would it look like if I ran a hardware software business? I had been there, done that, and gotten the M&A t-shirt for professional services. So, what would it look like to go into a different industry and do more product and hardware and software? The second is what would it look like if I could have an exponential impact on community and society around me? Specifically, what if for every 1 unit of effort that I put out, I would see a 10 to 20x return around me? And then the third is there's an organization called Praxis Labs up in New York City, and they talk about a redemptive organization. And so, and you can look them up if you want more information. But really, the third thing was, what would it look like if I helped build a redemptive organization? So I kind of took all three of those things and just sat on them for a while, for about a year, and sat on them, honed them to where I could communicate like pretty distinctly and articulate them clearly, like I'm doing right now. And then the third was to be able to socialize it among my close friends and colleagues of, this is what I wanted to do. I think a lot of people don't really aren't able to articulate what they really want to do, and then to be able to boldly and confidently tell friends and family, this is what I want to do, this is why I want to do it. And then just to hear back from their friends and counsel of like, that's a great idea, that's a bad idea. There's just this lack of knowing what they want, and then not being afraid to put it out there and taking constructive feedback on whether that's, it's the wise thing to do, or just, ways they can improve upon that idea, that way forward. Fortunately, I had all of that. And one of the friends that I bounced this, 3-part hypothesis off of, he said, hey, you want to take a look at this company here? And it was Eden Green, and they had great vision, great technology, patented technology that I can get to in a bit, but it just lacked a little bit of vision and leadership and a go-to-market strategy. And so that's where I came in, how I got interested in Eden Green, interested in hydroponics, interested in vertical farming. And from there, it was the easiest hard decision to make, to step away from my other company, leave that in the hands of my leadership team there, and then go run this.
Excellent. That's like you said, that is quite the story. So what so you mentioned that when you went over to Eden Green, that they had a great idea, but they're just kind of lacking the structure to get it out there, right?
Yeah.
So what made you see them and just say like, ooh, that's where I belong, that like I want to go and give these guys the chance to get their idea out there. And like what kind of called out to you from them?
So for me personally, it checked all 3 of those boxes of that hypothesis that I stated before, right? And so that was really important, because I knew what I wanted, and it checked that box, and I wasn't willing to compromise on what I wanted. From the other side, from Eden Green's side, I think what really stood out to me was the mission of Eden Green. The 2 founders, the inventors of the technology, had brought it over from South Africa and had really struggled and worked hard to get it to a point of commercialization. And so I saw what the heart behind why they built this tech, which was to feed people. And it wasn't, initially it was in South Africa where they invented it literally out of their garage. And it was born out of just a story of seeing a shortage of food in their own community, seeing a 5-year-old boy stuff his pockets with food to take back to his 3-year-old sister because it wasn't his day to eat. And then seeing just like, man, there's got to be we have the tools, we have our brains and just our inventive creator type mentality. We have to be able to solve for that, so that someone doesn't have to choose it's their day to eat or not. So I loved that vision. I loved that what they were able to create, and that's what really brought me on board, more so than the promise of this huge commercialization or this fantastic ag tech industry that we're in. It was really that story of just wanting to solve for people's hunger, and then acting upon it.
Yeah, that's that's a really great mission, and it fully encompasses the entire ideal of agriculture, which is to feed the world at the end of the day. No matter what the money says, or no matter what the technology looks like, the sole purpose of producing food is for people to eat it, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, that's really where the vision has not changed, and the where we are now is we call what's known as greenhouse as a service, is what we're calling it. But it's the opportunity for an investor, a group of investors, a fund, a supplier, a grower, even a retailer themselves, to be able to own these greenhouses and vertically integrate the supply chain. So if an investor or a fund wants to invest in these greenhouses, we will build it for them. We'll help locate the land. We'll build it for them. We'll turnkey manage it. It's greenhouse as a service. And then we'll even help sell the offtake, the produce, to the buyers. And we can do that. And it's much like a real estate deal. I don't know if you're familiar, if your audience is familiar with it, but it would be like a developer, a general contractor, and a property manager all rolled up into one. And so the investors in that property can enjoy the revenues, they can enjoy the profits, and they don't have to worry about managing the day-to-day operations of it. So that's our model. And it's been a quite a shift since the pandemic. It's been a shift of going from wanting to be like all the other players in the space, which have their own labels that they sell into grocery stores, and then just taking a step back and saying, hey, what is the best, Peter Thiel, who's a legendary technologist and investor, he talks about the 10x factor. Like, what are we 10x better than anyone else in? A lot of folks, when they start businesses, they think they're 1 or 2x better than their competitors, but really the businesses that make it, the ones that really explode, are the ones that are 10x better than anyone else. And so our 10x factor was our technology, the ability to combine the best of greenhouses, which allows us to use what nature offers for free, like sunlight, instead of using a ton of lights, like most of all the indoor farming you see in the news, right? So using the best of greenhouses with the vertical density of indoor farming that you see in the news. So when you combine the efficiency of greenhouses with the vertical density of indoor farming, what you get is us. And it's the greenhouse units. The greenhouses are economic units unto themselves. They're profitable. They're sustainable, both financially as well as environmentally. And they can be placed, almost anywhere, especially closer to urban areas, which is really important for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, definitely. And before we even dive into the urban integration topic, which is something I really want to get into, so you'd mentioned that the inventors came from South Africa, but that the company is run in the United States. Is
Yes.
this do you guys only do business in the United States for now, or are you doing business with other countries as well?
We're talking with funds and with investors, entities in a number of other countries. There are a lot more hurdles, right, in terms of construction, in terms of just the regional parameters, regulations, specifications. But indeed, we are talking to a number of other folks in other countries, because their needs, while different in some senses in the United States, at the end of the day, their needs are still for produce, right? So here in the United States, the supply chain, 90% of lettuce is grown in California for the entire United States. It's grown in California. So there's a 2,000 to 3,000 mile supply chain issue that's happening right now in terms of lettuce and other leafy greens. So that type of supply chain and cutting down on food miles is a problem particular to the United States. In Europe, the supply chain is less of an issue, and it's more of seasonal consistency, right? And then you have Britain, which is the UK, which is a total other deal with Brexit. They're having to rely. There's a food independence, a food resiliency issue that they're facing, which is a lot like some of the landlocked states, like a Singapore, that have a food independence problem. And then you've got folks over in the Middle East and in North and Central Africa, where it's really resiliency, right? And especially in the Middle East, cost is not necessarily an issue, but land is, right? The arable land, desert, water shortages, right? So each region has their own specific needs and their specific pain points, but we can meet the vast majority of them. So that's why we're talking to folks all over the world.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think that kind of covers a lot of the questions I had about the business. So I want to get into the technology, vertical farming, what the potential is for it. I've actually talked about it a couple of times here on the podcast before. I've had some guests ask about it, and I did my own research, but it was, back in a time when it was still kind of, just barely being talked about. It wasn't fully integrated yet. It was more of like hey, there's potential here, but it hasn't really been actualized. What kind of technology do you guys really focus on? I know you mentioned hydroponics. Is
Yeah.
what what are some of the things that you would be implementing in those greenhouses?
So our technology is patented for a special type of hydroponics, and it's called microclimate hydroponics. So think about if we were sitting in our rooms, sitting in our houses, sitting in our offices, and we did not have central HVAC. We only had backpacks that provided cool air in the summer, warm air in the winter. But here in Texas, the analogy is if your house was 85 or 90 degrees, but just the area around you, a foot radius all around you was 65. Think about the efficiency that would have in terms of energy usage. That's basically what we're doing with these plants. We're only concerned about the 12-inch radius around each plant, the microclimate around each plant, whether that's air temperature, humidity, water temperature, water nutrition, the nutrients, I should say, in the water, CO2 levels, right? Light levels, light intensity, light spectrum. We're only concerned about the 12 inches around each plant spot in the greenhouse. So, and again, that's patented. So what you end up having is this unique ability to only condition and handle 1/5 of the cubic volume of the greenhouse. So when you're only conditioning 1/5 of the cubic volume of the greenhouse, you're only spending 1/5 of the energy compared to an indoor farm, compared to a traditional greenhouse. You're only using, less than that on water and light electricity. And because we're dense, like vertically dense, we only use 1/10 of the light electricity costs, and then the light capital costs that an indoor farm uses that you see, on the news these days. Every time, a lot of the indoor farms are basically stacking fields on top of each other, right? I'm sure your audience has seen these huge stacks and racks of greens and lights, lights in them. And every time you look at one of those individual lights, just think to yourself, the next time you look at a photo of one of those, look at those lights and just think $1,000 per light. In the course of, an acre and a half equivalent of an indoor farm, you're looking at millions of dollars of lights. Wow. And 10 times the amount of light electricity that we use. Wow. Right. So the technology is wonderful, right? This microclimate technology allows for an immense amount of control over a lot of the variables to grow plants, both in terms of their nutrition, in terms of their taste profile, in terms of the size and weight of the plants. But really the value prop at the end of the day comes to, hey, we're able to do it in such an efficient manner that we're actually able to make money. And that's really the secret, the dirty secret around indoor farming right now, is no one's making a profit. They're not remotely profitable because, their build costs on average, if you can imagine, per square foot is $500 a square foot to build one of these indoor farms. And then to operate them, you're operating them at, with light electricity. And then don't forget the robotics, both the energy as well as the capital expenditure to put all those robotics in. You're still selling to the customer, still demanding $2 a pound for lettuce. So you're just not making money. Right. And so that's the challenge in the industry right now is they're not making, they're selling, but they're not making money, right? They're not profitable. And then on the other hand, you got greenhouses, which are profitable, but you need 5 times the amount of space. 1.5 acres of ours is equivalent to about 10 acres of greenhouse space. Good luck trying to find 10 acres at a remotely profitable, a remotely valuable, price close to an urban area that pencils into your economics. It just doesn't happen. Right. So you've got to push these greenhouses farther and farther out away from the urban centers. So that doesn't solve for this supply chain problem that we're dealing with.
Right.
So, it's a confluence of factors like the pandemic and the things that the pandemic caused, like transportation costs, that are really pushing our industry into the limelight, and specifically us, Eden Green, into the limelight, because we've seen just in the food industry alone, not to mention all the other industries, like good luck trying to get a Christmas present before Christmas if you haven't ordered it already. But transportation costs have gone up, depending on the industry, anywhere from 200 to 400% since before the pandemic, and they're not going to go down anytime soon. So for the business people out there, if you can imagine a 200 to 400% increase on any line item in your P&L will just break you. Well, when you're working with $2 a pound lettuce, that'll really break you. So that's what we're seeing, is people are trying in every which way to solve for the supply chain cost problem and this logistics problem. And we're one of the few that can solve it profitably.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite the business model there. Yeah, that's really interesting. One of the big things I know has been a concern with vertical farming is, like you said, it may be able to produce to the level it needs to, but it won't be profitable. Or maybe you can profit off of it, but it can't produce to supply the need that it would need to. And I know that, a lot of, especially more, traditional farmers, the average age of the American farmers, 58 years old, they're very hesitant with this new technology. And it's not that they're opposed to technology in general. They use all kinds of new technology on their own operations.
Right.
But I know a lot of people who are very skeptical about the integration of vertical farming, and say that it might be fun as kind of a hobby, but it will never reach commercial levels.
Yeah.
So hearing the potential that it could reach that commercial level, and not only, just supply, fix that supply chain issue, but also work almost as a supplement to traditional farming in a way that, we've been trying to figure out for a while. That's exciting news to hear.
Yeah. We at least at Eden Green, we never want to totally replace the traditional farmer. They are farmers here in America are some of the hardest working individuals in the nation, like hands down, right? Hands down. And we know what we're good at. We know we're good at leafy greens. We know we're good at herbs. We know we're good at some berries, but we're not good at everything. And so we want to come alongside the farmers and just say, hey, let us do what we're really good at and take those off your hands, and then let you focus on more profitable crops, more environmentally sustainable crops, or crop rotations, right? And take some of those pressures off, and then let's work together. I think, you talk about the average age of the farmers. I've got, all of our workers at our greenhouse down here in Dallas, Fort Worth, are, I would say the vast majority are under 30. And it's because, and we're attracting them more and more as the renown of our company grows. We're attracting these younger workers more and more because a lot of them want to get into ag. They want to get into farming. They just know the traditional one is it's too far out, right? It's they don't want to move out into the rural parts of the country. And then also too, they know, seeing technology, that there's got to be some better ways to grow. And so we're attracting a new wave of farmers, a new wave of ag. I wouldn't even call it urban ag. I would just call it ag, right? A new wave of ag workers and technologists and engineers, and production folks that just, want to provide. They have the same heart. They have the same vision that they want to help feed people. But they know there's got to be a better way. So we're really excited about it because of our efficiency within each of our greenhouses, we can afford to hire up to 30 full-time people per greenhouse module. That's a big deal, right? Especially if you're closer into an urban or suburban area. Who are you going to hire? You're going to hire your neighbors, right? So there's a place for robotics, and there's a place for AI, and we're using AI in terms of growing. But the robotics piece, we're happy to put robotics in there, but that's a lever that we can pull. That's an option for us because the greenhouses are economically profitable. Whereas a lot of folks have to put the robotics in, they have to bump up that capital expenditure in robotics because their OpEx, their operating expenditures just don't make sense otherwise. They can't hire 30 people like we can.
Right.
So that's really exciting for us to be the ability to hire and train and expose this new wave of ag workers and ag industry specialists into our greenhouses.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And that's a huge thing that I've been really talking about a lot on the podcast more recently. So I'm just give you a little information about myself. I'm a college student right now, but I'm studying to be a high school ag teacher. And I have said forever that, there are a lot of potential careers out there for people who are interested in agriculture that don't necessarily have to be on the farm. And a lot of them have been more research based or computer science based or engineering based, or law, or there's a wide variety out there. But one thing I've learned from doing this podcast for a while is that there are a lot of people, like you said, that are incredibly interested in agriculture that don't come from that background, and so they almost feel discouraged to a degree to go out and experience agriculture in its truest form. And so having something like that, closer to an urban area for them to be able to interact with, that'd be huge, for getting more involvement and for getting more interest, especially from the younger generation, because that's been kind of a difficult goal lately for agriculture is to try to get more of that younger generation interested and involved and wanting to help, and getting them hands-on with the work and everything, because we have a massive population to feed and we're running out of land by the day, and we're finding more and more difficulties in producing certain foods. There's been the production chain has been slowed down quite a bit, as you mentioned earlier. There's an increasing stack of obstacles in terms of agricultural production, and we're just it's getting harder and harder with the less people we have actually working on the production. I mean, I think it's less than 2% of Americans are actively involved in food production, and like I mentioned earlier, most of those people are closer to the age of 60. So it's really exciting to hear that there are industries out there that are expanding to that younger audience and getting more people interested in working with food production. I know that there was a big thing that I'm not sure if it ever got completed, but there was a project in Chicago they're working on called the Pegasus Project. They were trying to implement a 100-acre farm in the middle of Chicago, and it was supposed to be kind of a community-driven farm to help city kids learn about agriculture, to give them responsibility, to teach them hard work, to give them something to sink their hands into and to really get excited about. And it was supposed to teach them not just all the hard work and stuff, but also where their food came from, because that's a huge, there's a huge educational gap in terms of agricultural literacy. I mean, it's the entire purpose of this podcast. So I think that, what you're talking about right now, having more of those greenhouses and vertical farming and more of like the, we talked about it being urban ag, but it's really just ag now. It's all getting integrated together. Having more of that readily available for people who aren't living in those rural areas, it could be huge for agriculture. It could be huge for the next generation. It could be even huge for the traditional farmers who are looking for help.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think, as the traditional farmers have kids and they leave the farms, there's still the opportunity. I think the opportunity will only grow for people to be involved in ag. It's just going to look different, right? Mm-hmm. And I was talking with some folks here in the inner city, South Dallas here, and they're African American. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys said, "Eddy, most of our generation is only 1 or 2 generations removed from the farm, mm-hmm. right? Especially in the South and the Southeast." So there is still very much in the Black culture, very much large elements of agriculture, especially in food, in the what they eat, how they eat it, how they gather. It's very much agrarian based, and so the promise is there for folks in the inner city, not just to learn about where food is coming from, and not just to learn about, get exposure to all of that, but really to, have the opportunity to say, hey, uh, this is very much in my culture to go into this industry, to go make a profession, make a living out of this. And it's not so far-fetched as it sounds, that, I would go be a farmer. It just happens to be in the city. Right.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of promise there. It's less, it is less distinctive and disparate than people make it out to be, because of some of the cultural ties. And same with a lot of the minority communities. I myself am the son of Filipino immigrants. I'm only two generations, one and a half, really, two generations from an agrarian based vocation, right? That's my grandparents were they lived out in the farmland, and so I think it's a very, very much a doable. It's not a huge reach to think that the next generation of professionals, a lot, a sizable portion of them would be in the ag industry. It just will look totally different.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that it's kind of a difficult conversation for those people who are a bit more traditionalist, but agriculture does need to evolve, in order to meet the needs that we're going to need to meet over the next few years. It's going to have to change, whether it be through technology or through practices. I know that in my local community, because I come from a farming town, there are a few farmers who are trying new methods of regenerative agriculture or some other more non-traditional methods in terms of what we would usually farm in that area. And it's scary for a lot of farmers. They're not really sure what to expect, but a lot of them are starting to acknowledge that if agriculture does not evolve, then it's going to face some serious struggles. And I think that the vertical farming sphere is going to be a big part of that. I think that a lot of the integration with urban areas is going to be a big part of that. I think that rural and urban areas working together is going to need to happen if that's going to occur. That's something actually I just did a whole mini series on the podcast about urban and rural areas needing to work together as opposed to just being separated all the time. In terms of geographic location, sure, it makes more sense for them to be separated, but there's no reason for rural communities and urban communities to not collaborate and to try to find ways to integrate their strengths together and to use them to the best of their ability. But no, I think you have a solid point as far as the community goes, as far as their, some of those populations and their cultures, almost not to say they're obligated to, but almost have some sort of calling to agriculture that a lot of them don't even realize until they get that exposure, and then they're like, oh, that I wish I would have known about this earlier. This is great.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then I know that one of the big things, we've been talking about tech a whole lot. I know that we've been talking about, the hydroponics and the vertical farming and how all of that tech is going to be changing the landscape. Do you have any proposed, visions about what you think agriculture is going to look like in the years to come if this technology continues to grow in the way that it is?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of when, not if. But I think I can see, there being a sizable just market for indoor grown or hydroponically grown or greenhouse grown produce, especially as just the weather gets more volatile, especially as environmental controls get more volatile. We're seeing more listeria and salmonella and E. coli outbreaks from traditional farms. We're seeing shortages, right, of produce, and so I think there's going to be a rise in the market just for that. Right. It may even be, you have your traditional, your conventional, as I'll call it in the grocery store, conventional, organic, and indoor grown. And I think there's going to be pros and cons to all of those, both on a price spectrum as well as a taste profile spectrum, as well as a just some intangibles.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there'll be a market for that for sure. I think the consumer, the trend of the consumer is even over organic. They want more locally grown. We've seen a 200% increase in the demand for locally grown produce over organic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's going to be a rise in locally grown food and the demand for it. And it really is customer centric. Like wherever the customer wants to be, that's where the industry has to head. So there's demand for locally grown. There's a demand for cleaner, safer food. I think, just because when you can put these things so much closer to the consumer, it's going to last longer in their fridge.
Mm-hmm.
Anecdotally, I gave some greens from one of our greenhouses to some neighbors, and they forgot about it for 3 weeks in their fridge, pulled it back out, still good to go.
Huh.
They said it tasted great. It was crispy, everything, right?
Wow.
3 weeks after they put it in their fridge. I think that's going to become a surprising norm when people are able to taste this and then see how long it lasts.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to look when they get to the grocery store, they're going to look at conventional and think, okay, I think I'll eat this. I will pay less because I know I'm going to eat it in the next couple of days. And then there are going to be consumers, the same consumers who think about certain produce and think, I'm going to pay a little bit more because I know I'm not going to eat this right away, but I'm going to need it in a week. Right.
Yeah.
It's going to get to that level of split second consumer thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to move the market towards where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just the demand for consistent year round produce, not just leafy greens, but berries and everything else. Like right now, prime example. If I were to tell my wife that you couldn't get strawberries for 4 months out of the year, I think like there might be a full on revolt in my household, right? Because we have come to expect year round strawberries.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's an affordability piece of it. Like, do I want to buy a carton for $9?
Right.
There's that, right? But the reality is we expect it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's going to be that same expectation all around for produce all around, but along with that expectation, they're going to expect the price to come down. And so that's not going to happen with today's supply chain.
Right.
It's not going to happen when you have to get strawberries from Mexico or Chile or blueberries from who knows where, right? It's just not going to happen. So something has to change if that consumer demand keeps up. And with population growth that is and more population, headed towards the urban centers, that's going to be an issue. Mm-hmm. So I think those market trends dictated by the consumer are going to require some solutions that are not presently seen.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think you definitely are onto something there. And that's something that I've had a lot of consumers kind of concerned about lately is that, that supply chain having to a lot of consumers I've learned are worried about trade with other countries and not for the sake of, distrust of other countries, but they're saying like, well, if we produce all this food, why are we giving it away and taking it from somewhere else, and I think that having a bit more of a local access to some of those foods and having them fresher and having them a bit better quality, even that could be huge for not only the markets, but for public perception of food production and of agriculture overall. In terms of price and in terms of, all that stuff, I think you hit the nail right on the head. That all makes a lot of sense. And I think that'll be a good, not that, there's many people to convince, but I think that's a good selling point for this new technology and for this urban integration of agricultural methods. There was one thing that we talked about briefly before going into this episode that I'm not sure if we touched on in other ways, but you'd mentioned that you have these 4 ways of, the vertical farming and hydroponics can save our food system. I wanted to see if you had any additional thoughts on that, or if we kind of already touched on that throughout our other points.
Yeah, I think we touched on that, but just to, for summary purposes, the way that vertical farming will can positively affect, our our environment and just our day-to-day living is one is it's going to make produce more accessible to to everyone, right? Higher taste profile, more nutritious, longer lasting. It's just going to be more accessible. And accessible, I mean like absolutely physically accessible. Well, you see those not just in the high-end grocery stores, but in the bodegas and in the C stores of the world. So there's accessibility, there's consistency, like we talked about year round, right? Um, access to it, and then the safety one. It's huge. It is for those of us with small kids, just thinking about, hey, if I'm feeding my kid this, are they going to get sick? Like, if you've ever had a bout of food poisoning, it totally just jades you to makes you really wary of where you're getting your food from. So I think there's a safety aspect that's really going to, affect the consumer. And then environmentally, like being able to use 99% less land than a traditional farm, 90% less water, you know, 100% of the free sunlight that's available to us. That's huge environmental effects without all the negative runoffs of pollution or insecticides, or just the negative effects of traditional farming. Lots of water waste and runoff. So that from an environmental perspective is a huge factor in why vertical farming is going to make its mark positively on the environment and on culture and society. But it's got to be profitable. Otherwise, it's just a hobby, right? It's a subsidized hobby. And I think that's the big thing that farmers in particular are so skeptical of. That, and you mentioned it earlier, it's, hey, is this real? Like, can you do this at scale? Can you feed tens of thousands of people and not be subsidized or not charge them an exorbitant amount of money that only the 1% would be able to afford? And that's really the billion-dollar question out there that I think Eden Green is answering.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with you there. I think and it's really great that that's happening, because that'll definitely change a lot of minds and give a lot of hope to a lot of people, traditional farmers, as well as people who are beginning to see, our decrease of land and our increased population and get a little worried, seeing other options out there, and seeing that we're not going to just run out of food someday, that we have other methods of producing it, is definitely a huge deal. And that we're not only able to do that, but like you mentioned, produce it consistently, to get to presumably an increase in quality, to have that control over the environment. So you don't have to worry about insects, you don't have to worry about harmful pests, you don't have to worry about weeds. Like all of those things are such great advantages, that I think that there's definitely a bright future for this technology, as it continues to develop, and as, like you mentioned, it becomes more and more profitable. I think that the businesses and the agriculturalists are going to begin to see this as something that's not just as we've been talking about, a hobby, or just a concept. It's something that's becoming very real and very very viable in today's agricultural economy.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think folks like us, and it's not just us, but a lot of our colleagues in the industry, we know that's where it's all heading, and we all have the same common goal and vision. So that's the really fun part about it, is we're just getting started as an industry, and it's fun to be at the lead.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it's a really exciting time right now. I mean, I've gotten to watch the birth of several industries in agriculture. I mean, biotechnology is a very new industry, with GMOs and all that kind of stuff. Hemp is very recently a new industry. Vertical farming, like there's so many new industries that are being created because of technology and because of new practices and because of changes in law. Seeing this, I've been considering this a new revolution of agriculture. I'm not sure how versed you are in agricultural history, but there have been 4 or 5, depending on who you talk to, revolutions of agriculture, and I believe that this is the 5th. based off of my model. But it's we're in a new generation of agriculture that's more than just technology, and it's more than just practice. It's, an entire integration of culture and of society with, with traditional agriculture, and it's a conversation, really. Because in the other revolutions, they were all based on technology, they were all based on innovation. Like the second revolution was all about tractors, and the third revolution was all about chemicals and, using pesticides and all that kind of stuff. Arguably, the fourth revolution was the automation, the production of self-driving tractors and that kind of technology. And I think that this is a new revolution that's all about the integration and that conversation between traditional farming and how are we going to feed all these people, using those new methods, using that new technology, having a better understanding of what is potentially out there to produce better products for more people on less land. And I think that, it's an exciting time to get to watch all of that, from the perspective of somebody who's, actively involved in agriculture, as well as from a consumer perspective who's getting to try all these products and see the results of these new industries firsthand.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
Awesome. So I mean, that kind of wraps up all the thoughts and questions I had. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on to that conversation, or if you'd like to, let everyone know where they could find more information about your company and about what you guys are doing, and anything like that. You're more than welcome to.
Yeah, I mean, if people want to find out more, edengreen.com, like EDEN, like the Garden of Eden, green.com is where you can find a lot of information on us. And then on the socials, social media, whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn, I think it's all at Eden Green Tech.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'll put all the links down in the description so everyone can go check that stuff out. And I will be definitely, posting more and more information about this stuff as we learn about it. This is, like I mentioned, a big topic that a lot of my guests and audience have been very curious about for a while. So I'm excited that we actually got to cover it in depth and really get into the meat and bones of everything that's going on behind this new technology and this new industry. So thanks again, Eddy, for joining me. It was a lot of fun. I hope you had fun. I hope I was able to answer I hope I was able to address all the points you were wanting to cover there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Brendan.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that kind of wraps up this episode. So thanks all of you so much for tuning in and for, checking out the conversation. Hopefully you guys go and check out Eddy and see all of his stuff over his company. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun to watch them grow over time, and I'm excited to see where they go. But yeah, that kind of wraps things up. So hope to catch all you next week. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.